All right. Well, good morning to all of you. Thank you for being with us today for this town hall meeting. You are here by the invitation of our three lay leader boards, our trustees, deacons, and session, as well as our staff. We're here today to share with you some really important and, in my view, exciting work about the times in which we live. I wrote to you, and some of you may have seen this, some of you may not, but I began with a congregational update with these words: may you live in interesting times. This ancient proverb is considered a curse, something that you'd wish upon an enemy. Interesting times, I think, are, by their very nature, uncertain, and they are typically unfamiliar. Cursed or not, whether you think we are or we're not, I think it's safe to say that the times we live in are interesting. And I'm thinking particularly about what it means to be the church, what it means to hold forth the ministry of the church, to be faithful to the mission of the church in these times. And there are a number of things that come to me that I think of as being challenges. For instance, while the pandemic is behind us, we're still not quite out of it, it seems to me. We live in a time in our country when fewer people are going to church, where statistics will say in the last 20 years, 40 million Americans have left the church and they are unlikely to return. This, by the way, is the largest movement of people either to or from the church in American church history. Additionally, I think, I hear this so often, we would observe that it feels like churches are growing older, not younger. And I think we're concerned about that even here. About a year ago, we learned about some particular financial challenges that we as a church are facing. But let me tell you, from my conversations with other pastors, we're not alone in this one either. A year ago, we discovered that some of our strongest givers either have finished their race and have joined the great witness who cheers us on. And I'm thinking especially of someone like Annette Emerson, who has finished her race and who now encourages us with the saints in heaven. Individuals like that are no longer obviously in a position to give financially to the church. Others have moved to other churches, and for some, their financial situations just simply changed. Interesting times, are they not? And so as I think about these things, as I pray about these things, to be fully honest, as I sometimes worry about these challenges that we face here at FPC Morristown, I got to thinking about a year ago that I wanted to borrow a page from how we handled the pandemic. So this goes back to March of 2020, when the pandemic came and it shut things down in a matter of days. And we needed to figure out how we were going to continue on in our ministry, from Sunday morning worship to how do we meet together, how do we communicate? Like, all of those things were upon us, and we didn't have much time to think about it. And so what we did here, and I think this was such a strength that was revealed to us, we formed our lay leaders, session, deacons, trustees, and staff into work groups at the time of the pandemic. And I think we had at least a dozen, if not more, small groups who were doing work and reporting to session, our oversight board, who was in charge of leading our church. But session couldn't handle all that on their own. And so we got people talking together, thinking together, praying together. To refer to one of our ways of the week, we join hands. And as that way says, we will always be stronger, we'll always go further when we do. Out of that work from the pandemic came any number of wonderful, creative solutions. We doubled down on investing in our technology, which was really smart. We improved our website, which became a centerpiece to all that we were trying to do. We came up with wonderful ideas like, okay, if we can't be inside on Christmas Eve, what if we do a short service outside with fire pits, which became our Christmas Eve service? All of that came out of that time of thinking. So we can say these are times of challenges. By the grace of God, I say these are times of opportunities for us. Opportunities that God brings to us sovereignly, that we might be able to figure out, well, how do we best minister and serve in these times? So that led us to earlier this year, again, using the same playbook, to bring our leadership together into work groups to engage the challenges of our time. In a moment, I'm going to invite Paul Grossman, the chair of our long-range planning committee, to walk through with you the work that we did, the why that we did the work, how we went about it, and some of the proposals that we've now embraced as a session. Our goal today is to inform you of this very important, I think, wonderful work. That's the first goal, the first thing that we need to do, want to do with you as a congregation. But I also want you to be very aware that we need you to join us in the work of growing the kingdom of God. That's not the task of leadership, that is the task of the church. And in the same way, I want you to see it not just as a challenge, but as a great opportunity. There's a writer, a thinker that I really appreciate, who writes for pastors like me and churches like ours. His name is Tom Rainer. And Tom, not long ago, addressed a group of Christian leaders in Nashville, just about from his vantage point, what he sees as some of the challenges / opportunities for the church in these days. And he did point out, which is the case, that many churches are struggling, if not failing, in these times. I can tell you that churches have closed in these recent years for many of the reasons that we've already spoken about. But for churches like ours who are trying to figure out their footing and where God is leading us, Tom Rainer notes a couple of things that he sees that he feels are problematic. Number one, an unhealthy attachment to the past. Many churches are trying to recreate the pre-pandemic conditions of 2019. And the reality is the world has changed. And so what may have worked 4 years ago may not work now. And what worked maybe in the early 2000s may not work now. Doesn't mean we can't look at it, but it means that we need to understand that profound changes have happened, and changes that, in my view, are not going to be reversed. His second concern lies in the church's failure to comprehend the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about accelerated changes that were begun that just pushed it into fast forward, like some of the trends of moving away from church attendance. I think the pandemic just accelerated those. A vital aspect that Tom Rainer spoke about, which really resonated with me, is in churches he observes a lack of powerful prayer, particularly and especially in groups of people praying together. It's my observation that in places where the church is thriving around the world, and the church is thriving around the world, in many places, not here so much in the United States, one hallmark of those churches is those people seek God individually and together in prayer almost constantly. And one of the things that I will tell you I am and will be inviting you into is to join me in seeking God, maybe as you have not sought God before. A second concern that Rainer brought from his observation is that the church has really lost its heart for evangelism, that is, sharing the gospel with others so that they may come into the kingdom of God and become disciples who make disciples. That, I believe, is true. And that is something that may have to be reignited, rekindled, maybe even trained for us. in as much as I think we are called to invite people, first and foremost, to know Jesus, that's evangelism. But secondly, and in a very important way, to invite people into this church. Why? Because we got a pretty special church here, folks. And we have so much to offer. We're not perfect, but boy, do we ever have so much to offer by way of offering the gospel and ourselves to a community, thinking of where we live, to a community that has great needs, like the terrible loneliness and isolation that marks our society and our community. People live lonely, isolated, disconnected lives. But if you think about it, you know, here, I've got friendships that are unlike any others. Let's invite those people into those kind of relationships. But let's also keep this in mind. The question must be not what can we do to keep this church going so we have a future? That's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, where does God want us to go? Who does he want us to be? Not for our sakes, but for the sake of this community, region, and world. I believe that as our heart for mission in its full, from sharing the gospel to caring for the poor, for the addicted, for the isolated, as that becomes the centerpiece for the work that we do, then our church will thrive. Differently, perhaps, maybe not with the same numbers that we once had. I'm okay with that. If this results in a greater level of discipleship within our congregation, if we are growing the kingdom of God, then I'm all for it, even if the numbers are different. I'm all for us being about the growth of the kingdom. When we gathered as leaders back in the spring, the question that I put before them is the why question. So we think about, well, we want to see the church grow. We want to see our income grow. We want to see more young people come. We want to see more young families come. I, like the 5-year-old, kept asking the why question. Why? Why do you want to have more people? Well, so that we can have more money to help pay for the bills of our church. Why? Why do we need to have more money to pay for the bills of the church? Well, because we have to. That's not a good reason. That's not a kingdom reason. But if the reason is we want to see the kingdom of God grow in this region, which is such a powerful word, it was Jesus' number one priority, which more about the kingdom of God than any other topic. It's the right word. It's where I am seeking us going as a congregation. As we are committed to that, we can answer that as our why question. That is, we are here to expand the kingdom of God for God's glory and purposes, his name, not our name, for the sake of making children, youth, young adults, and adults of every age disciples who make disciples. If that's our why, then friends, we're all in. I'm all in. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to invite Paul Grossman, for whom I am so grateful for his leadership, for the incredible work that he has done, for his vision, his sense of humor, his friendship. I am very grateful for Paul. We will have some handouts to give you as we get to that part of Paul's presentation, but for now, let me invite Paul forward. And yeah, give Paul wild applause is very appropriate. All you gotta do is click it and you'll go.
Okay. All right. By the way, number one, if you can't hear me, and that's usually not a problem for anybody, but if you can't hear me because we're not mic'd for you, raise your hand, let me know. Second thing I want to let you know, when I was with IBM a long time ago, they said if you're really good, then you could speak extemporaneously like a pastor without notes, and people will love you. If you're not so good, bring notes. And for the rest of us, have charts. So I've got charts to help me through this. Okay, just going to try to read it. Grow the kingdom. First of all, I'd like to just position where I came in this process that Stuart mentioned. I had been kind of the point guy for a lot of the teams that had worked independently during the COVID thing. And I said, wow, that's a great model. Let's do the same thing. I can be point guy, but not have to do much of the work. So that was my idea. And luckily, just like the COVID thing, we were very fortunate in getting lots of good people who actually did all the work. But 2022, we're coming out of COVID, and we started talking about discipleship as kind of a theme for our church. But around the same time, near the end of 2022, the budget committee started raising concerns about what 2023 was going to look like, what the year end of 2022 was going to look like. Whoops. There you go. Okay, 2023 came around. February, we had the annual meeting. We did, in fact, have a projected budget deficit, which was bigger than any of us thought and kind of got our attention. So as a result, we commissioned the budget committee, which is BC, to continue to do some work. And they actually came back with a somewhat smaller deficit, but they said, yeah, we have a problem. We're not commissioned to make priority type decisions. We nibble around the edges. We try to find ways where we can save a little bit of money. But when it comes to big decisions, we need help. We need help from the session. We need help from church leadership. So that's where this whole concept of grow the kingdom came in, but it was a balanced concept. Discipleship is still really important because that's why we're here. That's what the church is for. But sustainability is also important because if this church goes away, we can't do any more discipleship as this church. Now, you as individuals could go find some other church somewhere, some other group, and might be able to continue discipleship. But we, as a church family, and parenthetically, I do in fact consider you all my church family, we won't be able to continue to do that unless we can keep the doors open. So discipleship and sustainability became the key foci, if you will. In April, I worked with Stuart and some of the other people in the leadership to come up with 6 teams. The idea was we were going to have an elder lead each of those 6 teams, but that the teams are going to be composed, just like COVID, of session members, deacons, trustees, staff, lay people, and that's what we did. So we were going back to the future a little bit. In May, we had a kickoff meeting. And actually, some of the charts you're going to see are actually charts from that meeting. I'll let you know which charts are from that meeting. A lot of those charts are just to give you a positioning. Please don't feel you have to memorize any of this stuff. We had a kickoff in this room. We had 60 people. I was thrilled because we sent out 60 invitations. And frankly, I wasn't sure we're going to get 8, 10, 12, 20, but we had 60. So that was terrific. That told me that we were going to be successful because we had so many different people from so many different perspectives on the church, age, diversity, business backgrounds, diversity, all kinds of, different folks. And I really do believe that if you can get different folks together and discussing a single issue, you could come up with a superior solution, much better than if I sit in a room by myself and try to figure out something. That's what Margie tells me all the time anyway. So in August, so what we did is we had a kickoff meeting. We had our first meetings of these 6 teams, and we'll show you what they were a little bit later. And the plan was for August, we were going to come together and each team was going to make recommendations to session. Here, you didn't hear the word proposal. Recommendations. Here's an idea. We think it's a good idea, and we're including that in our report to session. The plan was to take those recommendations, turn them into some proposals for the session September meeting, and to start acting upon them in Q4. And then the game plan for Q1 moving forward. So this is a living, breathing process that we're going to continue throughout all of 2024. And the idea was not only will we have those first 6 proposals being worked on, we would come forward with some additional proposals in Q1 of 2024. And if necessary, even some more proposals, because we got a lot of great ideas and we didn't think that anybody was able to swallow all these ideas at once. So that's why we have this phased or rolling approach. Question? Oh, grow the kingdom, sorry. When you do charts, especially small little things like this, you have to conserve space. So GTK, grow the kingdom, thank you. What's what? LRP. Oh, long range planning. Again, my committee. I apologize. It's hard for me to see this on the tiny screen, but thank you for the question. All right. So this is actually a chart that we used for session. We were trying to say, why are we doing all this? Disciples act to grow the kingdom, right? And the ministries that we have within this church are how we enact our discipleship. There were some trends, regular giving, and what we mean by regular giving is pledges, plate giving, those kind of things. When you add them all up together, they were going down. Special giving, in some cases, we had some huge special gifts that were bequests, things of that nature. And we were also seeing some increase in some revenue programs. So overall, in the last 5 or 6 years, we were kind of maintaining a steady state, even though maybe the glide path was going a little down, but we weren't seeing a huge drop off because as we lost some big donors, as Stuart has indicated, we also were picking up some special gifts, some new revenue from things like music lessons and rental of our facility. But there was heavier reliance on those additional sources of revenue. And then the trends for 2020 through 2023, we had COVID. We couldn't rent the church, for instance, so that revenue stream went away. We got very few people coming to church during COVID, so plate giving went away for the most part. So all of a sudden, when COVID comes, we kind of hit a significant downturn. All right, this is the Paul Grossman way of talking about things. So we had a challenge, and the challenge is you could see the boat, you can see the bridge, you can see the water. If the boat can't get through the bridge, you only have 2 choices. You got to lower the water. Sometimes that's very hard. Or you got to raise the bridge. Sometimes that's very hard. In this analogy, the boat is our ministries. The water is our operating costs. And the bridge is support that you all give us through participation and funding. So sustainability, that's a way we try to lower the water, meaning reduce expenses where we can, and or raise the bridge is support, meaning generate more revenue, generate more participation, generate more zeal for Christ, I think is what Ann McBride said, or on fire for Christ. If we can be more on fire for Christ, then we can raise that bridge, and a lot of these financial issues go away with all the great things that we're doing in praising God. So what do we do to grow participation, contacts with prospective members? We actually have a hospitality committee, and we're going to hear more about that. That's really focused on trying to do that. How can we leverage the contacts we have with people, engagement with our community, and the use of our campus? Ultimately, we grow through our time, talent, and treasures. You've heard this millions of times, but if we grow through our time, talent, and treasures, if we pay more attention to our knitting, as some of you might know that phrase, as old as I am, in terms of managing our funds, and think about managing our funds in the church the way we manage the funds at home, those 2 things are going to help us to grow the kingdom. All right, this is the session meeting that came. So we were introducing the Grow the Kingdom project to people and focused on these 2 themes, discipleship and sustainability, right? But whatever we do, have to keep Christ at the center. So you're going to see very clever charts. I don't expect you to applaud, but these are the charts that we use to describe to the audience in May, some of whom didn't know what team they were going to be on. This is the first time they saw their name on a given team. So we had one team led by Kristen Petrowski. And the idea was to say, there's some things that we're currently doing that we could do a little bit better. What are they? And let's try to come up with some recommendations for that. And these were the folks. So this is, if you will, not for you to read the names, just to notice there are session, deacons, trustees, and staff on team 1. Team 2 was outreach, and that was led by Lorenzo Eagles. And again, session, deacons, lay people, and staff. And a lot of names on these lists. Team 3, visitors, people who we have already met, meaning folks that have actually come in the door, but we may not keep track of them because that hasn't been our modus operandi for a long, long time. Sometimes one person may keep track of them, but as an institution, we weren't really saying, oh, that's a prospective member. Let's make sure they feel at home and feel welcome, and let's sign them up. Get them in a Sunday school class. Get them in a fellowship group, that kind of thing. So that was that group led by Ann McBride. The next group was wider community. The idea of wider community was, well, visitors are people that either came to our website or walked in the door. There are other people that we may not know who they are. They may have seen our website. They may know about us in town. How do we get out to those people? And that was a pretty big challenge, by the way. And that was Frank Mannion led that team. Team 5 was revenue sources. And the idea of revenue sources was very broad. One of the ideas was, can we get more from what we're currently doing in some revenue sources? And the other idea was, are there new ideas that maybe we could do, like having summer camps and things like that? So there are new ideas that could help us generate revenue, which would help us with sustainability, but also, if we're talking about Vacation Bible School as a source of revenue, or the step-by-step program as a source of revenue, it's not just a source of revenue, it's also enhancing our discipleship. So we were looking for ways in each of these committees to say, how can we raise discipleship on one hand and sustainability on the other? And the revenue sources team was one of the big ones for looking at that. And then the final team, led by Nancy Chumney, was kind of a, what do we do in the long term? How are we going to look as a church? What are the kind of issues that we need to address in that long term? So they were the teams. There were like 60 names that you saw on those lists. And if you notice, we try to do what Ed said, make sure we keep Christ in the center because we want to get on fire for Christ. So at the end of August, we had a session meeting, and Kristen came forward and she made several recommendations for everyday life at her church. Lorenzo had the same recommendations, by the way. These were typically 1-page, 2-page documents. They weren't like, real thick documentation. They were mostly, here are areas, here are things that we think are important moving forward for our church. Anne had the visitors team, and she made some recommendation, Frank, Gil, and Nancy. Nancy was an abstention, so I presented Nancy's team's recommendations. So we ended up with 30 recommendations out of that. And as you can imagine, some were really small recommendations. I'll give you one that was fairly small, but it's a big idea. Let's find a way to get some real feedback from young adults as to what they want in a church, because after all, they're the kind of people we're going after. Now, as you can imagine, it doesn't take a lot of work and effort to implement that. We also had some that are, much bigger. Here's an example, much bigger. We got to take the step-by-step program, which is not full year and not full day, and move towards full day, full year. Well, that's something that may take us 2 or 3 or 4 years to get to. And frankly, we may never get to full day, full year, but we are already taking steps to get to there. So we had some very easy to do tasks, some very challenging tasks, and what long-range planning, that kind of means me, Stuart, Wes. Our challenge was to take these 30 recommendations that were frankly all good, but all over the place, and try to come up with some themes so that we could create a proposal to go to session, and session could raise their hands and say, yep, that's something we want to do. So that's what this chart really says. And so here are the proposals. Hospitality, find ways to make FPC Morristown, more welcoming to visitors and members. And there were several things in that in the hospitality's team's recommendations that we literally lifted right out, and we said, that's a proposal. And we had if you will, a pre-made team of Ann McBride, Wes Allen, and Lori LaMonica to implement. So they had volunteered to implement. So it was easy to go to session in September and say, this is the first thing we want to do. And by the way, commercial break, Ann, would you like to tell us about what we thought was going to happen today, but will happen next week?
Our team is going to do a pilot today. Our concept is to create welcome centers. One out here at the kiosk and one down in the Northwest. And we're going to demand not only by our ushers and our readers, but additional volunteers to this hospitality concept. And give tours to visitors to approach them to get information, to give them a little takeaway, to talk to them about different ministries and follow up then after that to find out if they can incorporate themselves into the church. So next Sunday, watch your fingers so we get it all together. We're going to reintroduce keypads so that people can sign in. We're going to have a more consistent method of greeting people, following up. Paul Grossman's going to be in the parking lot to welcome people. And we just want to encourage all of you to participate in this. If you want to become part of a hospitality team that will rotate once a month, please contact me or Lex and get involved. We want everybody to do it. Everybody to do it. Just keep your eyes and ears open. You welcome them, shake their hand, talk to them, introduce them to the welcome centers, the kiosks, banners hanging that will indicate where these centers are, and just be the arms and legs of the welcome. Thanks.
That's a big deal. It's a big deal for a lot of reasons, but I'll just give you one. When I was in the room by myself, somebody walked up to me and said, by the way, do we have a nursery during church? And I said, yes, we do, but I didn't know we did until I started this process. And that's one of the kind of things that the hospitality team is going to take into consideration and start promoting, that we do in fact have a nursery, where it is, how you get there, et cetera. So, I mean, there's small things. Kelly.
How would we sign up to help out, cover certain shifts of that?
Talk to Ann.
Just tell me your availability. What we're going to do is we're going to try to get 4 teams of 5 or 6 people in addition to the deacons and readers, and then we'll alternate like once a month we will be on duty. And then you need to tell me whether you prefer the early shift around the 9 o'clock hour or the late shift around the 1 o'clock. Thank you.
So the next area was growing young. We have a young child and youth committee within session. But what we did is we said there was 2 recommendations that came out of these 6 teams. One specifically, let's get youth more involved in Youth Sunday. That's as simple as it's said. The other one was, let's try to provide high school service hours for kids that do work in the church and they can help. In some cases, Morristown has a graduation requirement, I believe. Lorenzo could tell me if we actually adhere to it, but to get service hours. So they were 2 relatively small things. We commissioned the young children and youth committees to come up with the ways to implement those 2 ideas. The next one was young adult feedback. I mentioned that we actually don't have a young adult organization, meaning there's nobody who is responsible to report monthly on what we're doing for young adults. So this was seen as a mistake, if you will, on the part of the church. We ought to address that mistake. One of the first ways to do that is to create this group to get some feedback from young people, what they'd like to see. And that becomes a kernel, if you will, of creating a new ministry called Young Adults, Young Families. Okay. And so membership was given that challenge. Balanced budget, pretty big deal. You all know we have a budget each year. You all know that you find out about it in February, which, Super Bowl Sunday. You all know that there's a number of people that have worked hard to create that budget. And you all know that we try to adhere to that budget during the year. What none of us knew is that there really wasn't ever a mandate for the budget committee to come in with a balanced budget, meaning where operating revenues, meaning the revenues from the plate giving, from pledges, et cetera, and from rents equal what we're expending. There was never a mandate for that. So we went to session with a balanced budget recommendation. We didn't ask session to balance the budget in 1 year. We said, let's have a 3-year rolling budget, but at the end of the 3rd year, we need to make sure operating income and operating expenses are equal, or we're going to be in big trouble. So we gave that to the budget committee, which was already in process of coming up with a 2024 budget. So we used the same group to say, we also, by the end of Q1, need to see a 25 and 26 budget and see the kind of progress you're making. There's more than just progress towards a balanced budget. When you have a balanced budget, you have to make trade-offs. So there's also going to be, if we're investing more in some areas, we should see that, right? Their slice of the pie should get bigger. If we're investing less in some area, we should see that as well. Preschool, step-by-step, I've already mentioned that. This is a big deal. There are a lot of churches that are able to really drive their discipleship and their sustainability or their revenues through their preschool program, because a lot of parents are now dual working parents, need preschool, but they might need more than what we have. I have friends who have said, I can't have my grandchildren in First Prez's step-by-step preschool because it's not full day. The parents don't have the luxury of picking them up in mid-afternoon because they're working until 5 o'clock. So that's a big deal for this church. It's a big deal for our discipleship, because these kids in this step-by-step program, just like the kids in our youth programs, just like the kids in VBS, represent opportunities for us to disciple to their families, and in some cases, bring their families into our church family. And the last one was the Sunday Excellence. I have to tell you, this was the biggest, most amorphous thing that we went to session. We said there were a lot of recommendations that said we ought to be focused on trying to make our Sunday the best possible Sunday experience, not just for our members, but for visitors. How can we do that? And we are in the process of creating a team. It's going to be led by long range planning, because we don't have any other way to lead this. It's going to be a multi-discipline team: worship, music, fellowship, Sunday school. There's going to be lots of representation on this team. And these are the 6 teams that have started. Stuart has asked me to give an update each month to session with what's going on with these teams. And that's going to be something that we do throughout 2024 as well as this year. What's next? The last thing, out of the 30 ideas that came, we probably were able to consolidate, and with those 6, maybe get 8, 10, 12 real ideas that came from the 30 and put them into the 6 proposals I just showed you. There are other proposals that we're working on, and we will at some point in Q1 come back to session and say, here's a recommendation, but here's kind of a high level overview. Communications, content, and delivery. Probably could do a better job in some of those areas. Community outreach engagement. We do community outreach and engagement in lots of different ways, but it's not coordinated. It's not centralized in one place. Facility usage. We have this wonderful campus. It's not clear to us that we've tried, keyword tried, to promote other people from outside using our campus and generating revenue, and also introducing people we might not know to this family, First Presbyterian family. Fellows program, think of that as interns, right? And the idea of having interns that can do lots of things for our church and can help the interns. And so that's the Fellows program. Small groups, I'm sorry.
Expanded fellowship.
Oh, I skipped. Okay, expanded fellowship. Thank you. There was several groups that came forward and said, we really ought to reinstitute adult fellowship because we don't have it. We really ought to look at ways of getting maybe outbound to seniors to create fellowships in communities like the Evergreen or Medford Leeds. So there was a definite idea to get into not only multi-generational fellowship like what we're trying to do more so in the Wednesday night programs that some of you are participating in, but also kind of focused demographic programs for fellowship. Small groups, again, we do small groups, but we don't actually have a team focused on small groups. And youth director, the last one of the recommendations was we should have a full-time youth director. And frankly, we took a step in that direction by getting a part-time youth director, and long-range planning is looking at ways of addressing these as we go forward in 2024. Thank you.
Okay, there's another service happening. I gotta go. Before I go, Paul, I think we have a couple of minutes, and maybe Paul and Ann, we have other session members here. I'm sure you have questions. Remember, this is not the last presentation of all of this. It's the first. We will spend time at our annual meeting first Sunday in February. Hopefully, we'll go home and watch the Eagles in the Super Bowl. I'm hoping. We'll see. We'll spend more time with that. In addition, something that I've been thinking about, I've already said this to you, but I'm giving a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, a lot of conversation about how do we as a church join in these initiatives. Specifically, what can you do as a member of this church? I've got some ideas on that. And I think after the first of the year in a sermon series and a lot of other communications, you'll hear more about that. For the moment, I've mentioned prayer, and I would just simply ask you to be committed to more prayer for our church, that God will provide for us what we need to be his church now, that God would lead us towards whatever it is he desires us to do in this community for the sake of the kingdom, that God would keep us together. This goes back to our ways, which are so important for maintaining the health of our church. One of the things my antenna has been up for in this process is signs of fear, panic, and anger. Right? Part of what happens in interesting times, unusual times, is the change makes people anxious, angry, divided. That's certainly being observed in our larger society. It doesn't have to happen here because we belong to the Lord. The Spirit of God is with us. So there's a verse from Deuteronomy chapter 31 that read last year, which has been really a theme verse for me. Deuteronomy 31, verse 8. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. The Lord will be with you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. That's good news. That's my strength and my hope for me, for you, for us as we go forward. Thank you very much for your time being here today. That just is so encouraging to see this. We will put this up on our website. The PowerPoint and the video will be available sometime this week. And for that, I'm very grateful. So if you'll excuse me, Paul, if you wouldn't mind coming back, maybe Ann, if you guys can just stay for a minute. If you have to leave, you have to leave.